All right. Hey, everybody. It's awesome to see 20 something people here to hang out with Josh and I and take a look at our new tool. So really appreciate y'all coming in, taking some time to see us here. Let's see. Kill that. Hopefully you guys can see us now. All right, I think we're good to go. This will be bumpy as our first live stream. We'll see how it goes. For any of you that haven't met me or talked to me or Josh or know much about us, my name's Matt. I'm the founder of Pod2. I've spent 12 plus years in planning, operators in the beginning with software company. And then since 2019, I've been doing consulting around, a lot of upstream planning, process improvement, cultural development, leadership development, all that kind of stuff with energy companies. So started this company in 19. So that's what we've been doing for the last 4 years. Late 2020, I sent Josh a tweet about a different kind of a model for a software business. And, a few months later, he joined Pod2 to found, the tech part of our business. So one thing that's a little unique about us is that, we do both consulting and tech. We're going to continue to do both because we love it, right? We're good at what we do. We're going to continue to do both things. And, I run the consulting side, Josh runs the tech side, and we're having a good time. When he joined, we had a lot of ideas of, what software, needed to exist in the market, things that were wrong with existing ones, pieces of workflows that were just ignored, a pretty good list of ideas. But from the beginning, Josh really had a strong vision for, being very problem led and listening to customers and letting, operators drive what kind of things needed to be solved. So, we put out a tool for Aries data validation early on. So that was the first tool that we put out in 2020. It's got its customer base that are pretty happy, and it's continuing on, and we're still running with that. Eventually, enough companies kind of told us that we needed to solve a problem in the scheduling and planning space to convince us to start on that last year. Companies had talked to us about it kind of from the beginning, but there's a few reasons why we didn't want to dive into that. But last year we kind of decided to enter into this space because we understood that there's some space there that needs to be filled. There's some problems that aren't really being solved for companies. And so that brings us to the planner. Where does the planner fit in kind of the whole scope of things? So I'm pulling up a view of our, this is an excerpt from, a book on planning that I'm finishing up. Should be out in the next couple of months. Some of you have probably seen, an early copy of it. But, we see planning as having these layers. Ignore the pillars for now. You can read the book to figure out those. But across these different layers, we've got the high level strategy, portfolio, corporate planning, field development planning, and operational scheduling. Where this tool fits is in that space, kind of field development planning and operational scheduling. All of these are a spectrum from how high level to how low level and detailed you'll get. But I'm not going to talk too much. You'll get to see the tool, in just a minute. But I wanted to kind of frame it out as, the need that we heard very clearly was that people wanted an easy to use, focused planning tool that can do scheduling, can do planning, it can do kind of all of those things. And it needs to strike the right balance between automation and control. And there's a few other quirks that I think you'll see in the tool today. Because scheduling is foundational to planning, obviously there's a lot more that goes into it, and we'll get there. But because scheduling is the foundation, that's where we wanted to start. So that's really what Josh will show today is what we've done so far on the scheduling side. And we're really, really excited about it. It's in early access right now. We've got, one company has signed up. We've got a couple others that are making their decision now. And, this early access offer that we've got, it runs out once 3 companies are signed up. So that's my bit on urgency. But for today, we want this to be interactive. We haven't, practiced this live stream, obviously, if you couldn't tell. We want to, make this interactive, talk to us, ask questions, throw comments, whatever you're thinking. Recording will be available. This goes to both our YouTube and LinkedIn, and so the videos will be there. And we might do some other stuff if there's good clips or anything to chop it up and share afterward also. So I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. But besides that, I'll hand it over to Josh and he'll show you the planner.
Okay. So hi, everyone. So again, thanks for coming to our stream. So what you're seeing now is the Pod2 planner. And so if you've been following us on LinkedIn, you might have seen some screenshots and videos and things like that of little pieces of what the planner does. But the purpose today is I want to really run through what a full workflow looks like in the planner and how all the functionality comes together. So this is the first view you see when you open the planner. So on the left, you have resources. So these are things like construction crews, drilling rigs, frac crews, basically anything that you would want to use in order to develop a well. And on the right, you have this timeline. And so this is showing you exactly how wells and pads are developed. So this works like any typical schedule view. So you can zoom in and zoom out. You can pan around. But what's different about this view is the focus that we've put into interactivity. So everything here you can interact with. So you can drag and drop activities around. So as you want to move, say, this pad, you can just drag it through time. And as you drag it out in time, you probably notice that it's constantly trying to figure out how can I improve your schedule based on the information you've given me. So the fact that I've manually placed this pad out here allowed these 2 crow wells to be placed ahead in the schedule because it realized, hey, construction crew 1 has some room there, so why not start site prep earlier for those wells? And so that keeps going like that as you drag this out in time. But what you're also seeing now is the drilling activities for these wells are also being pushed. So we set it up so that we have our own rules that say basically we can't start drilling until the site is prepped, obviously, right? So as you drag that out in time, it also pushes the drilling activities with it. And so that's at the pad level. So it's moving the entire pad. It's not, moving one well on the pad and then you got to go in and manually readjust things. It's moving the entire pad, all the drilling. And then because the drilling in turn affects the frac date, your on production date, and a bunch of other dates, those will all move with that pad too. And so we're really, like Matt said, been focused on trying to strike the right balance between automation, so putting in your own rules about how you want your schedule to work, versus manual override. So you layer on the information that you have, and it'll try to figure out how to create a really good drill schedule around those constraints that you give it. You can see things like mob time here as well. So that's another rule that you put in. So per drilling rig, you could decide on what a reasonable mob time should be, and it'll automatically set those up and apply the mob time between either wells if you want to do it that way, or pad, or if you wanted to do it between area, if you're wanted to have mob between like a frac resource, you could do that too. So you can totally tweak any of these rules however you want, and I'll go into that a little bit. But the idea, again, is really trying to strike the right balance between automation and manual. And so another example to show exactly how the pads work in here. If I drag this pad out now, so I know that the site prep happens there, but say we can't actually start drilling until much later in time. You can just drag drilling out in time, and again, it shifts all the other drilling activities on that pad and the frac activities. But what happens sometimes is, in real life, things come up and you can't actually finish drilling on that pad for some reason, right? In that case, it's totally fine to take one of the wells, say we can't finish 3H drilling, then we can move it on to a different rig line. And when I do that, you see it adds the mob time for that rig. And it moved everything else. So it's going to do the top holes and then pause, move on to another rig, do the top hole for that activity, and then do all the laterals. So, you can really decide how you want your schedule to work based on how it actually happens in reality. And again, this is as you'd expect it. We don't start fracking as soon as the first top holes are done or anything like that. So we've really tried to make it as intuitive as possible. So the goal here is, in your weekly ops meetings, you can drag and drop things live and see exactly how it impacts the rest of your schedule around it. So you don't have to just agree on dates and then go off and try to reconcile that with your plan and then reiterate it again in the next ops meeting. Instead, you can just do it live and see what that's doing to your schedule. So I mentioned the rules. So all the rules are set up in this assumptions tab. And so this is where you say when drilling rigs are available, mob times, what each resource is capable of doing. So, if you want to have top hole and lateral handled by different drilling rigs, you can do that too. Under here, we have our development templates. So this is how we actually control what activities are modeled per well. So you can see I have this simple one with 5 activities. For high-level planning, it's fine if you have 2 or 3 activities if you want to just have a really quick drill schedule. And so the use case there might be, you have existing wells in like something like Aries or Combo Curve, and you want to layer on a drill schedule and then export your timing back. So in that case, it might be totally fine just to have 2 or 3 activities here. If you wanted a really detailed schedule, you can have as many activities here as you want. So, you could have 20 or 25 different activities if you wanted to model everything that happens prior to site prep, for example. So you can have permitting information, land, geo, everything modeled in here as activities. On these activities, you also have defaults. So you can set whatever duration you want for any top hole activity, obviously. But this provides you a default. So if you have, a rough estimate of how long lateral would take based on the lateral length of every well, then you can just model that as a formula here. Same way that you would probably do if you were trying to create this drill schedule in Excel, or if you're using another tool currently, you would try to model it somewhere and bring those durations across. So the benefit of having it right here is that we reduced that ambiguous duration where we don't really know where that assumption came from. We can put it directly in here as a formula and model it that way. And also under here is where you set up, do you want site prep to happen as early as possible or as late as possible just before we start drilling? This also controls things like groups. So do you want to drill as a pad, or do you want to have a bigger or smaller group for that activity? You also control the order within the pad. So for batch drilling, then you can set up the order so that you can have a top hole as wells 1, 2, 3, and then reverse order for lateral if you want. And you also get into what resources are required for every activity and SIMOPS versus batch drilling. So there's a lot of flexibility in here. So the idea really is just, like I mentioned, try to build a reasonable schedule based on the assumptions that you have, and then layer on all of your actuals onto that. So one other thing I wanted to mention, so we've been focused on scheduling initially just because it's fundamental to the world of planning. So you can't do planning without schedule because everything else is kind of based on your schedule timing. So we focused on scheduling initially, and if you're looking at the tool now, you can probably see that we don't have things like capital and production for that planning functionality that a lot of companies would expect. So that is on our roadmap in the future. And so we're going to work with companies to figure out exactly how they would like this to work, ideally in the planning tool. But we just wanted to make sure that scheduling was very solid before we moved on to that part. There's kind of the other direction besides higher level planning too that we're interested in, and that's the pre-spud or well readiness workflow. And so we're trying to figure out exactly how we prioritize those. Like I mentioned, you can already layer in things like permitting and land into activities already. We're just trying to figure out exactly what level of status tracking makes sense in here and how people would interact with their plan. So that's a really quick intro to the tool. Do we have any questions at this point? So if you're on LinkedIn, you can put questions in the chat there, or if you're on YouTube, I think they should come across too if we have this integration set up.
Yeah, I know one question that we've gotten a few times is, obviously Josh showed dragging and dropping and, recalculating really fast, but, does that work with, a real world data set?
So what I can show, so we've been really focused on making sure that the whole scheduling calculation is real time. So we want to see everything happen live. So you don't have to, hit a calculate button and wait for minutes or hours. We want to see your plan updated live. And so say this is a bigger schedule. So there's a few more wells in here. And if you drag and drop wells in here, it's the same kind of thing. So it updates quickly. But what's interesting with this one, is as we zoom out, you can see just how many wells there are. So I can drag this one out in time. So it's still totally live. And I can keep zooming out. And as I do that, it's the same thing. So you can see exactly how these rig lines are being impacted. So you can see the colors shifting around behind this activity as I drag this one out. And just a little bit further to make sure.
Okay, Josh, we get it.
So it's totally live.
No, that's awesome. I definitely didn't set you up for that one. So we do have a few questions that came in. I'm just, I think, impatient with the lag between the stream and the questions coming in. There's one about, when from Jessica, when the scheduler reschedules, what objective function does it use, or how does it know what to prioritize?
So it is a little bit interesting. So there's not one clear objective function. We're trying to account for a bunch of things, just as like you would do if you were scheduling, by hand. So we want to schedule as if a human was in the loop doing that, just much, much faster, obviously. So there are some things you can control, though. If you don't have anything prioritized, then we'll just try to close any gaps on the resources. So we're in a sense, we're trying to maximize resource utilization there. If you don't want that, then you can choose how you want to prioritize things. So currently under settings, I have asset prioritization, anything. So it's basically saying, I don't really care when my wells are scheduled, and maybe all the wells are approximately the same value. So it really doesn't matter which ones are scheduled first versus later. And in that case, you can leave it as anything. If you do care about the order, there's you can use any attribute for prioritization. So, for example, a lot of people want to prioritize by NPV. So in that case, you can do that. And when I do that, it just rescheduled everything by NPV. And so that acts as kind of a proxy for how important the wells are to me. If you wanted something more custom and you want to balance NPV versus initial capex and things like that, you can model more complicated things in here as well. So in a sense, the objective function is whatever you would like it to be, and we're just going to try to give you a reasonable schedule based on that objective function, knowing that we're going to try to do things reasonably. So we're not going to place this well way out in time just because it has a low NPV if I still have a lot of room on this resource. So it's trying to balance a bunch of things at once in order to figure out not optimal schedule, but a really, really good schedule. Exactly what you would probably do by hand if you were manually iterating on it by comparing well value and going back and forth and trying to customize your plan around that.
Yeah. And your follow-up question, Jessica, how is it prioritizing by NPV? Right now it's just an NPV input, and then it's basically like a ranking. And then maybe down the road we'll have more sophisticated stuff. Yeah. Right, Josh? Okay.
Yeah, we started with just having attributes in here. So we'll open this up later on so that you can, like I said, write your own objective function formula in here essentially. So if you wanted to rank it by NPV dynamically, I think we could probably do those kinds of things later on. But for now, the assumption is, you already have Aries or combo curve or something. So you do your initial run in there to get a sense of the well value. And so you can move those NPVs into this tool and then rank it for your schedule.
Yeah. And then the next question, I think, leads into, is there an export function for a table of dates to load to Aries? Josh can talk about the direct integrations with Aries and combo curve here in just a second. But, foundationally, we want, a problem that we see with a lot of tools is that they don't play nicely with others. That's why we're, very open and honest about what we're building and how it works. And, there's folks from combo curve and folks from Quorum and, people in this demo and all that stuff. And that's awesome. We want to share, there's enough space for us all to do, really good things and for operators. And so, we're going to play as nicely as other companies let us. So any integrations that are possible that make, that not so fun part of work of, copy pasting and data manipulation, all that kind of crap. We want to make sure that all those integrations work as well as possible. Did you want to show or mention the Aries and combo curve integrations? I'll talk about that.
Yeah, sure.
Or do we want to get to that later?
We can jump into it now.
We've got a few other questions we could go through, but
okay, let's maybe run through the integration, and then there may be questions to follow on to that too, and then we can questions after. So I'm going to create a new plan. So just to show how this works with Aries or combo curve, Valnav, Mosaic, and others. The idea is that you can start off with a new plan very quickly. So you create a new plan here. And I'll just create a test plan. So when I do that, I can say, I either import wells from Aries, import from combo curve, or manually create wells. And so these are the integrations that we have today. We have a lot more planned, and so we'll keep expanding that. But initially, if you wanted to import wells from Aries, you click this button. For anybody that's used the Pod2 validator, you probably recognize this form. But you basically pick your Aries database that you want to import from, connect to it, and pick the Aries project scenario, and then hit import project. And so when you do that, this is a pretty small project, so there's only 18 wells in here. So it just lets you know that I'm going to import these 18 wells into your schedule. And so right away, we can jump to the drill schedule now. And so what it's done is create a default template for us with just site prep, drilling and frac, and it created some resources for us. And so that's why, obviously, this schedule is staggered very nicely, and it has just constant durations for everything, but it gives you a starting point. So already you can start tweaking this now by going over to the assumptions tab. Like I said, if you wanted to add another drilling rig, you can just copy it and change the timing here, add mob times and things like that. And then you can see that it impacted my schedule. Now, if I wanted to rearrange the schedule based on, again, real world constraints that I know about, I can just drag them out in time and then hit export to Aries if I wanted to bring that back into Aries. And so I can show how that works really quick, especially because we had a question about it. So if I open up my database, I can just scroll over here. So I have this start date column in Aries. And so currently it's populated like this. The only thing I need to do on the integration side is just add an attribute to the export. So I can say, I want the Aries start date to be exported from my drilling start date. And so that's all that we need to do on the setup for this. So back on my schedule view now, as I drag things around, I can just hit export to Aries. And when I do that, might be hard to see if this actually does update. But anyway, these dates all change whenever I do that. And so if I should really have them up on screen at the same time, probably. So you do that, and then it takes a second for it access to sync, and there you go. So it changed all those dates. And so obviously you can then reference that start date in your economic lines in Aries, and it gives you a really quick way to set up your schedule in here, export Aries, rerun economics, and see what the changes overall. And works the exact same way with combo curve and all the other integrations that we have planned.
Yep. There's another question from William Fox. Do we have plans to expose hooks or APIs for scheduling events for other systems to use, like PO, purchase orders, and stuff like that?
Yeah, really interested in that. I think any system that has an API that we could tie in with, we're interested in exploring that. Right now, the actual cloud component of the software is fairly limited, so we don't have our own cloud API, but we're interested in exposing more, webhooks and things like that in the future. If you wanted to do local database syncs, then that's also something we're interested in. So, really happy to follow up on that one.
Yeah, and I think that the second question about linking activities to like equipment, fuel rental cost templates and stuff like that, I think I could definitely see that workflow working, but I think it'll kind of depend on where customers in the market kind of take us, because there's some that as they get their hands on it, they're starting to go kind of down that route, the more operational, well readiness, kind of pre-spud, more detailed execution management type stuff, and then others are trying to take it the other way. So I think it'll be interesting to see kind of where customers take it, but yeah, I could see that making sense for sure. So Michael asked, can you text enter dates for specific events?
Yeah, for sure. So if I wanted to edit this one activity, for example, I can just change the date in this, and you can see it shifts it out in the timeline. And so this is live too. So, if I just change the date, it'll impact the schedule, and I can see what the changes are live. And this also changes, like if you look up in the top left as I do this, you can see that date changing live. We probably will have a way in the future to also have events defined somewhere, maybe under assumptions. So if you're waiting for, say, a facility to be completed before you can do a group of wells, then you can tie the well dates to that. That's something we've talked about, but we don't have in this software yet. I think that could be interesting too.
Yep. All right. Barry asked about accounting for efficiencies on different rigs. So a rig drills faster than another.
So we don't currently have a way to set that up. We've talked about ways to try to account for that. I think there are a couple things. We probably want to have a way, say on each drilling rig, to say what the priority is. So you can prefer certain rigs over others. Currently, they're basically ranked equally if they both are available at the time when we're trying to figure out how to schedule wells. So we probably want to have a way to preferentially select one rig over the other, but also beyond that, sometimes, like you said, certain rigs are less efficient. So building in some kind of scaling factor or something like that to certain rigs could be interesting, or being able to tie activity durations to the rig that will be drilling it. So we don't have anything in the software right now for that, but that's something we want to explore further and see how people are trying to represent it today in their models.
Yeah. All right. Chris Britt asked about like the logic to let it auto schedule projects out into the future. So I think Josh showed the like templates that kind of dictate the timing and duration stuff there, but I don't know what else there might be to say about that.
So something that we've talked about, there's a LinkedIn thread about this for sure. But being able to say, so I want to prioritize by NPV, for example, but that has certain implications to my schedule. So all of the CapEx is going to be probably higher. So the entire schedule is totally front loaded. So being able to say, for example, a capital budget per year to space out projects that way. But also, if you wanted to develop a certain area or a project, then move on to another one, then we could imagine some kind of functionality here where you basically restrict how future projects are developed. So that's something we're also thinking about currently. Just trying to figure out how it makes sense to just group an entire project together rather than just like pads or a specific area. It could be like some kind of like hierarchy about how you want to actually execute a plan. And so that's something we're trying to figure out. So if you have any ideas about how you would like to do that, definitely get in touch, because we're interested in understanding how people do that currently. I know a lot of the nav models that finance teams use have some of those rules built in. So we want to explore that more.
Yeah. All right. John Baptiste asked about, how long does it take to run that optimization? And I think Josh mentioned it a little bit earlier about how, it's not technically optimizing maybe, but you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So what we found is like the typical optimizers, it would just take too long to run a schedule optimization like this. Even for a smaller schedule, it's at least minutes, probably hours, maybe days, possibly weeks for the really big schedules. So it's not really worthwhile, in my opinion, at least for most companies, to try to figure out the true optimal schedule, because by the time you actually get the result of that optimization, all of your real world assumptions have changed anyway. So in order to bridge that gap, you kind of need something like what we're doing internally, which is trying to figure out, like I said, a really, really good schedule based on all of your actuals plus any rules that you have around how you want the plan to be developed. So it's not truly an optimal schedule, in the strict sense of the word, but it's trying to give you a schedule that works intuitively as you'd expect, and does help you a lot in trying to not maximize your objective function, but come very, very close to the answer that you would get if you did optimize it.
And thanks for the kind words also, John Baptiste, about the UI. I agree. I love it also. Lee asked about being able to lock a date so that it doesn't get auto scheduled. You want to show that, like the auto and manual, how that works real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever you move things around in here, you can see that it's annotated now with manual when I hover over it. You can also do that manually by clicking the manual button here. So if you wanted to lock drilling and leave frac as auto, then that's totally fine. Or if you wanted to lock the entire well, you can do the 1x1 currently. We're going to add an option also to lock everything before a certain date in case you do want to start with, some kind of initial schedule that you've imported from somewhere else and just layer on the rest automatically. So you can toggle between auto and manual for each one of these activities. If you have drilling as auto and you manually place frac, then that's also totally fine. So you get this kind of situation where site prep's also manually scheduled. So we won't move site prep, but we'll try to keep drilling as close to frac as possible, since we have our rule set up that says we want to keep them attached. You can always manually schedule them and space them out if you want to take control of the timing fully.
Yeah. Another question about the exports. You want to show like how we can export now if it's not a direct integration?
Yeah. We do want to have direct integrations with everything, just to be totally clear. So if you're using ValNav or Mosaic or anything and we don't have the integration built yet, then you can also copy to clipboard here. And then when you paste it into Excel or whatever grid that you want, it'll give you all of the dates and resources. So this is basically your drill schedule timing. So you could paste that back into ValNav or Mosaic or something, and build it that way. We'll probably have another format similar to this where you can customize it a bit more. So you could choose which attributes are included. We're missing a UWI column right now, which we have pretty strong feelings that we should always include a UWI column. So we're going to continue to expand this one as well, but this will get you started. So if you wanted to export the timing and put it back into ValNav or Mosaic, just because we don't have an integration with those today, then you can do it this way, and this gets you most of the way there.
Yeah, and from the beginning, we're committed to not being the problem with any integrations, and so I know every software has limitations and stuff, but we really want to pretty religiously we believe in supporting integrations and letting people own their own data and workflows and everything like that. So as soon as we run into a company that uses a tool that we need to integrate with, like so far, we've built those integrations for them. And that's kind of the plan. One of the companies is a Mosaic user, and so we'll be trying to build that out shortly too. So. All right. Robin asked about construction crews, contractors, frac crews. They all have their own schedule optimizers. Do we see our system interacting with theirs? Like historically, I haven't seen, the willingness to actually share like data very well between, contractors and the operators. Like if they're willing to, absolutely. I think that whatever we can take in from there and bring in and share, I think that would be great. Historically on, projects and stuff that I've seen, the problem was more, they either shared PDFs with each other, or it was in a Excel sheet that they didn't want to give access to. But, if they're willing to, and it makes sense for the workflow, well, yeah, for sure. Because the data absolutely is related and should interact, but just a matter of, if companies are willing to do it.
Yeah. And on that point, there is, I know, a lot of effort to share frac schedules now to nearby operators and that kind of thing. And we're really interested in having direct integrations with those that, if there are wells fracking nearby, then we can schedule around that rather than you trying to manually sync those up by hand.
Yep. And then Michael asked about scenario planning a little bit. He said never mind because he saw the scenarios drop down, but I think it's probably worth talking about scenarios and kind of how it is now and how we see it working in the future.
Yep. So the idea of scenarios in here is basically, so this is a new plan, so there's nothing in here. Okay, I'll just speak to it rather than switching over. So the idea is that you have scenarios that exactly model what you were saying. So you can have a scenario that like you basically start with a baseline scenario, which is what you actually expect, and then you can create scenarios that are based on that. So it's kind of like you start with your baseline and then layer on an additional drilling rig or remove one of the drilling rigs from the baseline. And so you can kind of chain together scenarios like that. So you can run different scenarios easily and do scenario analysis on top of that. So scenarios today, it's really like we're just, it's almost like a placeholder right now. So we're currently building it out. We've thought a lot about how we want it to work. But before we commit to any certain model of scenarios, we wanted to work through it with a few operators. So that's just why it's not fully built out yet. But all the common cases, so adding and dropping your rigs and flicking between those scenarios really quickly, anything like that we would want to cover. Or like I mentioned capital budget. So one scenario might have the capital budget enabled and one disabled. So you get to see what the impact is on your timing that way.
Yeah, and then he mentioned the case of picking up a contract frac crew for 3 months and then putting it back down can be tough and frustrating to optimize.
Exactly, and so we would definitely want to cover cases like that. And really, a lot of companies are doing this kind of analysis in Excel today, so we want to help with that, because just doing that kind of scenario in Excel today, it could be fairly involved depending on how you have your model set up. So we want to make it really easy to represent that kind of thing where you temporarily add a frac crew and then remove it again.
Yeah, Lee, and I think you're right. Like those blackout dates and availability can help, but then taking a new resource that's available and making sure that you're not breaking up the schedule in a dumb way can be tough, especially in Excel, but in other tools and stuff too. So having that little bit of help to prioritize things in a way that makes sense, it seemed useful. So I think that's all the questions that we've gotten so far. Definitely, I'd love to hear, even if you don't have a question, I'd love to hear comments from people on, what do you think? Like, are we on the right track? What else would you like to see built in here? Obviously we've got a roadmap and plans and things like that, but we'd love your input. We really do want to be, very customer driven on this stuff. In the meantime, while we give people a couple of minutes to put some questions or comments in, Josh, is there anything else you think is worth showing? I know some of the splitting up a pad and some of the stuff that you showed in the beginning can just go kind of quick and it's easy to miss. Could you show that a little bit more? Anything else?
Yeah, so we can run through how splitting up a pad works. So, if we have these things scheduled, where was the one I split up? Yeah, so this one. So how pad splitting works, like I mentioned earlier, in case you weren't here. So we have a batch drilling in this case. So we have, 1, 2, 3, followed by 3, 2, 1 for the laterals. So sometimes it just turns out that you need to come back to a pad because real life happens and you can't always keep everything together on the pad. If that's the case, so you schedule this one manually and it turns out you need to leave the pad and come back to it. So you can drag it onto another resource and everything just happens as you'd expect. So it moves all the top holes and the laterals on that same resource. It's not limited to the amount of splits you can do or anything like that. So, if I had to move to another rig for top hole and then come back on the same original resource, you can do that too. You can force the laterals to have gaps between them if you want. It's very flexible about exactly how you want to set up your schedule. And again, that's based on the fact that you need to be able to represent these things when you're importing your actual drilling schedule anyway. So in the ops meeting, you might be asked to do this kind of thing and say, we need to be able to support this exact case. So whenever you do that, though, like I said, it'll move everything else around the manual dates that you put in there. So if I force this onto this rig, you can see it's still automatically scheduling everything else around it. And you could even overlap them. So we're probably going to add a warning for this case. But if you want to force your top holes, a top hole on top of another lateral, you can do that. And we'll probably just let you know with a warning somewhere at some point if you wanted to be warned about the case that you probably didn't mean to do that. But again, we're not going to force you to do it how the rules say, because sometimes there are just things like that, or you didn't want to have to change the duration of this top hole, so it ended up being shorter. So even though it looks like it's overlapping, maybe the top hole actually ends on the start of this lateral. So, we're trying to be as flexible as possible while also being able to use the rules where it makes sense.
Yeah. Lee asked about dual rig modeling. I think maybe talking about like having a top hole and then a big rig. If I'm off there, then correct me, Lee. And then asked about the cost model also.
Sure. So yeah, the setup. If you wanted to do, say, you separate rigs for top hole versus big rig, or a lot of companies have like a dedicated sputter rig. So you could do that kind of thing in the assumptions by you can restrict the rig here by giving it a dedicated capability. So you could say some rigs are only able to do top hole activities, or some rigs are only able to do lateral activities. So you can restrict it that way. You can also restrict it by area if you wanted to say this rig can only drill wells that have specific attributes. That's a little bit of a different case, but that allows you to do other situations where, if you're drilling both vertical and horizontal wells, then you can assign different rigs based on like the well attribute itself. So yeah, you can basically split it based on capability if you wanted to handle the case that Matt mentioned.
Yeah. And then as far as the cost model goes, I think we've seen, the ability to make it by rig or by well or by materials or by, timing. And we're thinking about that now. And, how do people need to model it? And I think the answer, there is no industry consensus on it. And so we're thinking about that now. Like if you've got some ideas for what it ought to be, we'd love to chat about that and hear them for sure. Another one about changing the text and color of the boxes, like coloring by reservoir or changing the stuff that's in there.
Yep, absolutely. So this is probably exactly what you'd expect to see in here. So you can choose exactly what text you want to display on each one of those boxes. So right now I have the asset name, activity name, and pad. If I wanted to display other things like NPV, statuses, if I wanted to know that like a permit's going to be ready in time for drilling start or anything like that, you can display it just by adding more boxes here. We'll probably make it so that you can customize this a bit more in the future too. So, you can control the placement of the text within the box and that kind of thing. For now, they're all just essentially concatenated together. But if you just add it in here, you can jump back to your schedule and you can see the MPV showing up for each one of those wells now. For colors, so currently we try to pick a color, and we hope it's a reasonable color so that they're all not blue by coincidence. So we have our own palette that we will just apply right now. So you can base that on the asset name or pad or anything if you wanted. So I think you said reservoir, so you can do it by reservoir if you want. If you do it, if you change that, you can see that now everything on the same pad, they actually have different colors. See, this is one of those cases where these colors are different, but they're almost the same. So in these cases, we also want to eventually have an override. So if you wanted to make Pink Floyd pink, then you'll be able to do that. But for now, yeah, we just try to auto generate some reasonable colors, and hopefully they're not all the same by chance.
Yeah. Hey, Kurt, he's asking about map functions. So obviously with rig moves, but it could help with like regulatory limitations.
Yeah.
Based stuff.
So that's a really interesting one. So there are a couple of reasons that we want to have maps that are pretty soon. So the first is modeling rig mob times. So if you know the surface locations of all your wells, which you may or may not, depending on how the stage of your plan. If you do know the surface locations, we would like to be able to use that information in rig mob times. So instead of hard coding 15 days, you could base the mob time on how far the rig's actually mobilizing. So that would be really interesting. That's one of the ideas we have there. The other aspect is around some of the assumptions. So on my frac, for example, right now I'm just saying I want to wait until we're done all laterals with the same pad before starting frac. That is not going to work if you have a lot of pads close by. So you might still be drilling a pad nearby when you start a frac in this case, or you might even want to restrict it so that you don't frac in the same area at the same time. So that's where a map would be really handy too, I think, of being able to restrict it by, say, like a frac area or something like that. So you can kind of segment your map in order to groups of wells. That would be really interesting. So it's a long way to say that we don't have map functions right now, but we're definitely thinking about some of the interesting use cases there. And it would be really great to be able to use proximity in some of these things, especially when we get into offset frac interference and things like that.
Yeah, and I think so. Location and coordinate based calculations and stuff for sure is definitely going to be included for offset frac interference and all those other kind of constraints and things that Josh mentioned. But also, I think this is another maybe philosophical thing, is that every tool gets asked to add maps to it, and the ones that do often like put them in kind of silly places, and I don't know, it just sometimes doesn't make a lot of sense. So we're trying to be really intentional about what gets added and making sure that it doesn't muddy up the core workflow for sure. So we've seen and done some interesting kind of mock-ups of where like a visualization of mapping stuff could fit, and yeah, I think we'll see. Thinking back to Lee's question about cost model, on the off chance that you were asking about like our licensing cost model and not like the cost inside the tool. We do by user annual subscription because this is going to be built out. We're going to be doing a lot with this. So that's the model. Exact pricing, I don't think I want to share that publicly yet. We will very soon, but we're still in early access, and so there's a lot of stuff going on there. But yeah, we're pretty dead set on named users too. So we've lived in the world of concurrent licensing, and we've been there side by side with engineers that were trying to do their job but couldn't because their IT was cheap and didn't buy enough licenses, and so they were locked out until 6 p.m. And I don't think we want to wish that hell on anybody else ever again. So that's the only kind of quirk with our licensing and cost model stuff. Yes, you were? Okay. That makes sense. We'll chat details offline. That's funny. I think that's all the questions that have come in. We can awkwardly hang out and look at each other for a few more minutes and see if any more come through. But I think I'll ramble for a few seconds. Like I said, we are in early access right now, and so we mean it when we say we're limiting that to 3 companies that sign up. We've got several on the verge. We've got one that's already signed up. We've got a couple other that are deciding now. And so, first pay, first serve for that pricing. And that pricing is locked in for forever for, the number of licenses that you buy. That's the salesy piece. But if anybody, is interested, wants to talk more, y'all can follow Josh and myself, more Josh. He'll be posting and talking a lot more about the planner probably than I will. But then we want to also, we want to work with people on, what it's going to look like in the future. So if you want to, not quite ready, but want to stay in touch, anywhere on our site, you can put in your email and we try to share, anything that's not spammy on there. Try to keep it interesting too. But reach out, any questions, if we're not ready for you or you're not ready for us, we'll tell you. We'll be pretty brutally honest about that kind of stuff. So we really appreciate so many of y'all coming out and watching. I really appreciate this. We're really excited about this tool. The people that we've shown it to and are getting their hands on it are really excited also. So we're glad to see that, this can make the planning and scheduling world, a little less miserable. Josh, any parting thoughts?
No, I think that's great. Yeah. Thank you all so much for coming out and checking this out. And like Matt said, let us know if you have any feedback. We're really, really interested in speaking to companies that are going through some of the workflows that we talked about here. And so the whole point of this tool is to fit into your workflow as it exists today. We're not going to try to change, throw your entire planning process and start over. We want to fit into the workflows and tools that you already use. And that's why we've built it this way and why we're so focused on having really, really good integrations with everything that we connect to.
Yep. That's it. Well, thanks everyone. Yeah, you'll see more of us before too long. Like I said, anybody interested, just give us a shout. Y'all have a good day.
Thanks.